of the events in the Middle East and their contagion in Europe. When Minister for Justice, I was participating in informal meetings of European Ministers for Justice, and at that time I can recall the ministers in Belgium and France were particularly concerned and worried about the type of tragic event that we saw taking place in Paris on Friday night. There were plans to try and ensure that there was a coordinated approach at European Union level to deal with terrorism. And I believe within the EU we need to do better. We need an EU-wide coordinated anti-terrorism response. We need joined-up thinking in areas of internal and external security and greater intelligence monitoring of online communications. We need better exchange of intelligence between states and within states. I discovered when both Minister for Justice and Defence, on occasions there was a lack of joined-up thinking between intelligence within the security and justice area and within the defence areas within individual states themselves. Greater use of CCTV to monitor our streets where there are major vulnerabilities. This is used to great effect in the UK, but to lesser effect in other European capitals. We need targeted interference on social media with jihadi websites and other social media outlets. We need also, of course, to tackle alienation and marginalisation in Muslim communities. We need to encourage educators and leaders in Muslim communities to constantly confront the sources of radicalisation. And I believe the leaders we have within the Muslim communities in Ireland do not need that encouragement. They are already doing that work. I want to welcome the condemnation of the Paris atrocities by leaders of the Muslim community in Ireland, who contribute in so many positive ways to the life of our country, and so many of whom have been proud to celebrate their acquisition of Irish citizenship. More recently, prior to the tragic events in Paris, much of the conversation about European vulnerability surrounded the possibility of lone wolf attacks by individuals. What we saw on Friday night was an organised attack that poses additional difficulties for European security services. Air power alone is unlikely to defeat Islamic State in the Middle East and end its occupation of land in Iraq and Syria. What we need is for the sponsors of tyranny and sectarianism to recognise that bloodshed will continue until a rational settlement of the Syrian conflict is achieved. But no one should expect rational engagement from fanatical Islamists who believe they have a direct line to God, and the God they pray to has sanctified martyrdom, cruelty, slavery, death and destruction to achieve the unachievable goal of a global caliphate. Should anyone doubt this, then simply read the sickening statement of Islamic State acclaiming the onslaught on Paris on Friday night, celebrating mass murder of innocents. Paris is described in that statement, and I quote, as the capital of prostitution and obscenity, the carrier of the banner of the cross in Europe. Of course, Count Corda, what Paris stands for is what they most fear. For Paris is one of Europe's great capital cities. It's a symbol of liberty, equality, democracy and fraternity. It's a centre of art, literature, culture and vigorous intellectual debate. It's a city of tolerance, which respects the individual right to religious freedom or to follow no religion at all. In essence, it is all of those things which religious fanatics most fear. In concluding, I again extend my sympathy to all of those who were affected by the horrors of the events on Friday evening in Paris.
Thank you, Deputy Timmy Dooley.
Thank you very much, Count Corla. I welcome the opportunity to contribute to this debate, an opportunity to raise the issue of the recent terrorist attacks in Paris that resulted in scores of casualties and indeed left countless more injured. I, like all of my colleagues in this House, will start by extending my sympathies to the families and friends of those who were killed or injured, and indeed to those who were injured and remain in hospital in Friday night's terrorist attacks. The violence inflicted on the people of Paris was truly horrifying and appalling. It exemplifies the barbaric nature of ISIS, which has since claimed responsibility for the attacks. The attacks at the Stade de France, at the Bataclan Concert Hall, and indeed at restaurants and bars signify ISIS' hatred of the European way of life, a way of life that we hold dear in this part of the world, that of solidarity, freedom and democracy. Such hatred cannot be allowed to fester and to grow, and it is clear that a coordinated European response is required to rid the world of this terrible evil. The terrible atrocities in Paris should be used, in my view, to unite Europe, and will not, I hope, be used as a catalyst to undermine European cohesion and solidarity. People of all races, cultures and creeds were indiscriminately attacked, and citizens of 15 countries lost their lives, and indeed many more that were injured. This was not just an attack on France, but an attack on our democracy, on our freedom and our way of life. Let us remember that the European Union was founded with the aim of ending the frequent and bloody wars between neighbouring countries. The Founding Fathers sought a peaceful, united and prosperous Europe. That goal, in my view, is as relevant today as it was in 1951, when the Treaty of Paris was signed to establish the European Coal and Steel Community, the European Union as it is now known. Has changed fundamentally, I suppose. The Union as we know it has changed fundamentally since 1951. It now comprises of 28 countries, but the founding principles that underline it, while sometimes challenged, remain the same: freedom, peace and solidarity. While ISIS has struck at the heart of Europe, I think we as a nation and as a member of the European Union must stand united and work collectively to overcome the scourge of terrorism and protect these principles, which are, in my view, the bedrock upon which the European Union was not just founded, but has continued to grow and develop over the intervening years. Any action that we must take must be firm, has to be resolute, but must be focused. However, it must also be measured and balanced and proportionate. And of course, that's a difficulty right now. Oftentimes, the immediate reaction to an event like this can, in some cases, be more unhelpful than helpful in the long term. So we need to be focused, as I said, and measured and balanced and thoughtful in the way that we address the attacks. The attacks in Paris underscore, in my view, the need for greater coordination among and between European member states and highlight the need for the sharing of intelligence. The truth of the matter is, as Guy Verhofstadt, leader of the ALDE group in the European Parliament, wrote yesterday in The Guardian, and I quote, "Terrorists know no borders, while our 28 national state security agencies cannot cross borders," end quote. It is clear that the intelligence needs to be more effectively shared, and we all have a role to play in ensuring a more coordinated response to such attacks. As that article very succinctly puts it, borderless terrorism can only be tackled by borderless intelligence. To dismantle and undermine these terrorist groups, I believe that it is necessary to understand the cause of such extremism and indeed fundamentalism. If we do not at least try to understand the root causes, radicalisation will continue unabated and indeed with the devastating effect that we saw on Friday night. The causes, of course, are complex and multifaceted. Poverty, social exclusion, discrimination and ghettoisation are only directing young people towards extremism, which give those who have become disenfranchised a sense of identity and purpose, and often a sense of brotherhood. And people in these circumstances, in their vulnerable state, are easy fodder for those who wish to take them into a radicalised environment and use and abuse their vulnerability for the aims and ideals and the visions, and the vision, I should say, of other more sinister characters that have a completely different agenda at heart. How we deal with this requires efforts from all sides and all communities, both within and between countries. It requires a multi-layered response, which should encompass both a top-down and bottom-up approach. It requires education and understanding on all sides. It requires Europe taking a progressive role and formulating concrete proposals that will unite Europe and its people and will turn the tide against radicalisation. We must ensure that the attacks in Paris are not used to further add fuel to the fire, that are not exploited to radicalise disaffected youths on the one hand and create xenophobia in Europe on the other. Let us not play into the terrorist hands. The extremists who carried out these attacks, these awful attacks, want an extremist reaction. It's essential we don't give them one. Furthermore, it is critical that the events in Paris are not hijacked by others to advance politics of exclusion, hatred and division. We must remember that there are about 1.8 billion Muslims in the world, and they are not represented by these terrorist groups. We must ensure that our approach is inclusive and that the language of us and them, insiders and outsiders, does not permeate our thinking and indeed our responses. We must all stand in solidarity and work collectively to ensure that we remain staunch in our opposition to such indiscriminate acts of violence and an ideology that undermines democracy and the greater good. We here in Ireland, I think, have a unique opportunity to work with European member states and on our own part to stop the rise of extremism. I note from reports that between 20 and 30 people have travelled from Ireland to take part in conflicts abroad. While the risk of attack would appear low based on intelligence provided by the Garda Síochána here in Ireland, we must ensure that people living here do not pose a threat to other nations, and I think it's important that the Government would work and liaise with other European colleagues to prevent fundamentalism from taking hold both here in Ireland and indeed in other European states across the Union as a whole. We cannot ignore the issue of Syria and the migration crisis in Europe. They are both fundamentally intertwined. Solving the ongoing conflict in Syria is pivotal if ISIS is to be dismantled. While there may be some attempts to use the Paris attacks as an excuse to reject offering any refuge to those fleeing the conflict in Syria, we must resolutely oppose this thinking. We believe that the vast majority of those seeking refuge in the European Union are trying to escape the horrors of conflicts and the ravages of war. While I believe that Ireland must play a part in providing a safe home for those escaping conflict, we must put in place robust safeguards to ensure that those who seek refuge in Europe and in Ireland are genuine migrants. What happened in Paris must not prevent us from taking a responsible and collective approach to the migrant crisis. I want to reaffirm the support of our party for a fair and equitable resettlement programme to the migrant challenge. I think it's our response and our support for the continuation of a welcoming hand and a safe home for those who seek refugee status here will define our response to this particular crisis. And if in any way we are allowed to move away from that position of caring, that position of wanting to help, wanting to reach out to these people, if the attacks on Paris were to change the mood or the mindset or the thinking of Irish people, well then that would be success for ISIS. Because what ISIS seeks to do is to dismantle the efforts that are being made between and within countries to reach out, to connect and to be at one. That's not in the interests of ISIS, and I think you will see that from the way in which they have responded to what has happened. There was a powerful article yesterday in the Guardian newspaper, it was actually today, written by a former hostage of these terrorists, and he said, and I quote, he said that the terrorists will be heartened by every sign of overreaction, of division, of fear, of racism, of xenophobia. They will be drawn to an example of ugliness on social media. Central to their worldview is the belief that communities cannot live together with Muslims, and every day their antenna will be tuned towards finding supportive evidence. The pictures from Germany of people welcoming migrants will have been particularly troubling to them. Cohesion, tolerance, it's not the way they want to see it. End quote. That, I believe, is how we in Europe must respond, with cohesion and with tolerance. Thanks, Leslie.
Now the next speaker is Deputy Pat Breen.
Thank you very much, Les Corla, and like all the other speakers, I welcome an opportunity to, I suppose, comment and express sympathy this afternoon with the people of France after the atrocities on Friday night last. Most of us, I think, were either watching the end of the 9 o'clock news on Friday evening last, when news filtered through of shootings in Paris. The information came very scarcely, coming. And most of us also remember last July here in Ireland, when 6 of our young people died in Berkeley on the balcony collapse, we all remember the grief for this and the families, the 6 families that suffered as a result of that horrific accident. Take us back to last Friday night. We have now nearly 200 families grieving for the loss of their loved ones. Nationalities from 25 different countries have been affected by this. Plus also people that will have life-changing injuries, 390 people injured as a result of the bombings and shootings on a very quiet evening in Paris when young people were out enjoying themselves, eating in restaurants, attending a match between France and Germany, and watching or attending a concert as well. And those events, I think, have shattered not just the civilians and the people of France and Paris, but also throughout the world. It was in Boulevard de Voltaire and Rue Albert and Rue de Charonne and Stade de France that maybe has changed the world for a long time, particularly Europe. We saw the events of 9/11, how they changed the world. But I think the events in Paris will also change Europe, because we're living in very difficult, challenging times. This was the worst atrocity in Europe since the Madrid bombings over 11 years ago. And as I said, targeted young people, people congregated in restaurants, at a sports venue, young and old, at a concert hall. And I suppose to hear the horrific stories of those people that were affected by this, those survivors, I think will stay on our memory for many, many years to come. Particularly that Irish girl who spoke last night and the bravery of her boyfriend that shielded her in the midst of blood and tears in that concert hall. And today we have the Russians acknowledging the fact that the Metro airliner, the Airbus, was brought down by a bomb. And I suppose this, really brings home to us the challenging times we're living in. The events, I suppose, that we are experiencing at the moment all started in the Arab Spring. And, of course, what happened in Syria as well. Countries like Morocco were able to overcome these difficulties. Tunisia, up to earlier this year, had overcome them as well when ISIS attacked there as well, in which many Irish people were affected in that as well. And I suppose what all people are saying here today is that we must all stand together. It's extremely important. I think what also echoed in me as well was after the bombings in Stade de France, people congregated on the pitch, and when they went home, they sang the French national anthem on their way out. This is liberty. This is freedom, Lascian Corla. These are the values, I suppose, that we all stand for in Europe and in the world, and that's extremely important. We know that 3,000 or 4,000 Muslims from all over Europe went to Syria over the last number of years. As Deputy Dooley alluded to, 30 went from Ireland. Most of these have come home. We know 3, I think, died out there. But a number of these people, Lascian Corla, are still are home, and they estimate there's 200 or 300 people still in Europe that have been radicalised. So this event here, hopefully, will be the last one, but it'll be difficult to know if it will be the last one. Britain is on alert at the moment. It's highly likely something could happen there. We're the exact opposite end, and to hear that is highly unlikely. So what's very important for all of us, and this is evident from what the information that's coming out from the Paris bomb shootings, is that this event started in another country. It started in Belgium. And these people were able to commute on the TGV or by car down to Paris to commit those atrocities on Friday night last. So this is where I suppose we need to have joint up thinking here. We need obviously closer relationships with our police force. And I think here at home the Gardaí have done a really good job in that. They're monitoring the situation here in Ireland. There's about 50,000 Muslims here in this country, and there's a very close relationship with the Muslim community here. The majority of those 20 or 30 fighters that went to the Middle East to fight were there to support their fellow Muslims in overthrowing oppressive regimes, or they went there for humanitarian reasons. But there's always people that come home that are radicalised. And I suppose this is where our Gardaí, I commend our Gardaí in this. What they do is they mix with the community, the Muslim community. They have ethnic-speaking Gardaí as well, and they build on that relationship with the Muslim community here, build and engage with them, because that's extremely important. That's where they'll get their information. None of us have spoken about, I suppose, the lone wolves that attack as well. And these are people we don't know about because they don't travel abroad. They're not part of these people that travel to Syria. And it's very easy to go to Syria, as we know. You can travel from Dublin to Istanbul and go over land to Syria very quickly. But there are lone wolves as well operating. And these are radicalised on the internet. So we do need joined-up thinking here. As I said, the approach the Gardaí have taken here have been commended by the UN Counter-Terrorism Committee, and I think that's important because they communicate, they engage. I engaged myself as chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee with the Muslim community, and I've met them on many occasions, the imams here. And as I said, they are very moderate in their outlook, and you know, as the Taoiseach said earlier today, Islam is a religion of peace, it's a religion of truth and kindness and compassion. It is not a religion of hate or violence or terror. And I think that message has been sent across the whole globe by most Muslim people, and that's extremely, extremely important. Challenging, or how do we prevent further atrocities happening again? It is very difficult. France, President Hollande has said that France is at war. But I think what's extremely important here is, and I said this, is that the communities and the police have a good relationship. That's extremely important as we move forward here today. We are challenged by the terrorist groups out there. It's not just ISIS. There's Al-Shabaab that operated in Somalia. We go to Nigeria. We have another terrorist group there as well, Boko Haram. And of course we have Al-Qaeda as well. So it is challenging. I was in Morocco earlier this year and I met the Prime Minister just before, in January, just before the migrants, Deputy Dooley referred to the migrants earlier there, and just before the 800 people drowned in the Mediterranean. I think at that stage Europe woke up to what was happening in Europe. I mean, the Prime Minister of Morocco created a frightening picture for me of what was happening in Libya, lawlessness happening in Libya, people crossing to Libya. And I think it's extremely important that we are sympathetic towards the refugees that come in here from Syria, the genuine refugees. But there's also economic migrants coming in from other countries, and this is a very lucrative business, this business of people crossing into Europe. And I met the Deputy Speaker of the Slovenian Parliament recently, and he told me of the 1,400 people that were screened at the Slovenian border, only 47 of them were from Syria. The rest of them were economic migrants. So there's a challenge here for all of us. We have to be welcoming those genuine people that have been affected by the violence in Syria, but at the same time we have to protect our borders. It's important, as I said, that we recognise the work that's been done by our security services, that greater cooperation be there between the forces. And I'm delighted that the French ambassador and his staff came in here today to hear these statements, show that close solidarity between our two countries. We remember the victims, and as we remember victims of previous terrorist atrocities, and we hope that their deaths will be a turning point in us dealing with the crisis that we have in the world at the moment. Thank you.
Now the next speaking slot chaired by Deputies Desi Ellis and Angus O'Snuddy.
I want to express my condolences to the families and loved ones of everyone who lost their lives in Paris as a result of the attacks last Friday night, to those who succumbed to their injuries since, and also my well wishes to all who were injured or traumatised by these despicable and brutal attacks. I hope for their recovery and that they might be able to return to their lives and pick up the pieces. The French people are no doubt strong people who have endured fascism before and survived, and will do so again. I think we were all shocked by the terrible scenes we saw unfold on our television screens, on streets which are so familiar to many of us. In a city not far from here, it all seems so awfully close to home. Many of us knew people in Paris that night, or who have made it to their home, and we thought of them. It was impossible not to think of friends and families who were out that night to socialise, to drink, to eat, to attend a music show or even a football match. That is human nature, to connect through our experience and what we know. But it is for us but a short flickering and terrible glimpse of the life of so many people around the world who endure the barbarism of ISIS and their ilk, on their streets or across the parapet of a moving frontier. Paris joins a long line, unfortunately, of places where people have first-hand experience of the carnage and indiscriminate murder that ISIS brings with them. We also know of the awful attacks in Beirut, which happened the night before the awful events in Paris. There, 43 people were killed by 2 ISIS suicide bombers, motivated by nothing other than a hatred for humanity. 239 people were left injured, many with utterly debilitating wounds, which will haunt their lives. In Baghdad on Friday morning, 18 more lives were taken by this group. They also shot down a Russian plane out of the sky this month, killing everyone on board. But these killings happen far away and in places where maybe we have become far too willing to accept such things. Many will claim that ISIS has attacked the West, but in fact they have attacked all of humanity and have been doing so since their inception. We are now forced to turn away because ISIS will not turn away, or to not turn away because ISIS will not turn away. They will not stay in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt or Turkey. Their aim in the attack on Paris is clear. It is to foment hatred amongst us, to put Europe on the back foot, to create distrust and anger against the refugees that have fled them and the Muslim communities in our country. Europe must respond with humanity. Humanity for the victims of ISIS that have risked everything to make it to our shores. Victims who have thrown themselves upon the mercy of Europe and the ideals it is now said ISIS are at war with. These ideals, if they are genuine, have never been so important and must be cherished and built on. The very vast majority of Muslims are totally opposed to ISIS. They are their enemies as much as ours. I want to express my solidarity also with the activists of the People's Democratic Party, or HDP, of Turkey, who have lost 37 comrades in bombings at their rallies since June. Attacks orchestrated by ISIS and permitted by a Turkish government intent on using ISIS to consolidate power and defeat the Kurdish people. The HDP have defended the right of the Kurdish people to defend themselves and championed their fight against ISIS. Brave and dedicated Kurdish people in the YPG and other groups fight ISIS on the ground. They are giving their lives every day to defeat fascism and deserve our solidarity, as do those who have travelled across the world to aid the fight against ISIS. Many have died, but their comrades fight on. They fight for the existence of their people in the face of what can only be described as evil. They also offer the people of that region a progressive, tolerant and fair way forward. Again, I want to pay my condolences to the victims of ISIS in Paris and elsewhere. In the words of the French anti-fascist movement, ni oubli, ni pardon. Never forgive, never forget.
Now call Deputy Angus O'Snothy.
Madam Sir, this part of Macovlone, O'Cree, Agwal, the Pubble, na Franca, atá búilte Codona sin leis an uafása a hit Mach an Ina, there a herring buin, Bonusi, Marafacha, an Tragóid, an Nósor Siúd, na Clanana, atá treis Dina Chailúnt, a Cahara, a Comala sin, siúd atá Gunta, agus dó siúd atá treis Dina a Chailúnt, in san Unsi Marafach sin, Guim, Suidnas Thierry, siúd atá Marav, agus an Clán agus na Carda, siúd atá Gunta, as na Unsi Marafach sin, an ihe ine, tá súlgum go méid bishop ortha amach an seo. Má leis céil nachhfuil sé má chumas an méid atá le rá gomsa rás Francais mas an go méid sé dásta meach muid treis a léad reintóibh siúd bhí Francais acu na Guine sin a rá as Francais, but níorbh fé na Francais ar fé fálam na Francais orm riamh fiú go raon an éir Tacta Dala, Tony Gregory, Irak le Haring Dassam nor a bhí sé an bhuaine níl sé níl sé fálamtha gom I gceart riamh. So mas an go cógameach do Bród Oring agus Bród ar an ambassador bhí an seo níos luí agus muintir na Franca as an slí a dúmper pobl páras iad hain ihe ine. An dignit a bhí aá anán an únsaí barbarach a bhí ag tarlú timpeall agus an crógach de léirigh siad ar níthe sin in anán an uafás agus an crógach dó hin. Mar fanna an íomhá lumsa a chatharla go deo do luch leanúna soccer a bhí I stad na Franca agus iad ag canna os ard agus iad ag fágant an stadium le Bród agus I New Clán don únsaí a bhí tarlú agus níor bhis go fós cé có donna sa bhí sé, ba bhí hiig siad cé có marafach a bhí sé béidir agus iad canna an air an náisiúnta có na Marseille. Na náid sin a bhí á únsaí ag an am is náid iad de bun tréthe an poblachtánachas ar a bhfuil ar iadolachas bunathe agus a bhfuil stáit na Franca bunathe na híd éalacha atá tíomhthír de liberté, fraternité, equalité agus massam is buí dóibh son I dhéanaan únsaí sin má dhéantar cúngú ar na saoirsaí a bhain poblachtánaigh agus déan láthaí amach thar cinnte mar sin go dtéireach atá a tastáilú a siúd atá déanamh na húsaí seo. Go mbeidh na saoirsaí sin mailethe nó cúngathe. Mar níl siad a bhábhar an déan leahas, níl siad a bhábhar poblachtánaigh, níl siad a bhábhar go mbeidh daoine ó cinenne difriúla, daoine ó inscinne difriúla, nó acma difriúla, nó fiú ó tíortha difriúla mar atá le chéile. Mar is féidir agus massam hain gur sin an príomhrod gur féidir linge a léirú don down agus dóibh siúd atá a déanamh iirecht an na bun ceancapan na sin atá tíomhthír don poblachtánaigh agus tíomhthír don na poblacht atá bunathe timpeall na Eorpa agus agéin go bhfuil méid sásta seasamh le sin, go bhfuil méid sásta an lámh cúnta a lethe dóibh siúd tá an rúchás ach a thara dóibh siúd atá ag tethe ó a lehéadí agus na únsathe tá siad sanna déanamh timpeall an man airthe ach a tháirithe. Massam gur cordúin comala sin denmh cinnte de gannneanamid correlation made a táid rééis a bheith tógant in Europa go háirithe ó thaobh gur féidir linge marachtáil le chéile agus Massam gur sin an dúshlán is mór mó doinge, but comala sin Massam gur an tacreacht is mó chora gwine an sort únsí marafach hála ar an íine go bhfuil muidne nach bhfuil misás a chórsús leis an méid tá siad san íanamh, but tá muid fós ag gháilt leis an tógra atá roing down níos fearr a thógant bunathir na hídéireacha sin.
Go mágat teachta Nishan Teachta Eric Byrne.
Thank you. Yes, Leskin Corla. Yesterday I had the pleasure of standing with diplomats and the ambassador for 1 minute silence at the embassy, and I want, as I have on that occasion, extended my condolences to the people of France. I want to be joined. I want to join my condolences with everybody who's spoken here today in this tribute. I remember listening to the news on the way home the other night as the horrors unfolded, and I said to myself, oh my God, how can human beings be so inhumane to their fellow man? When you think of the sentiments of those who told those attending the rock concert, as reported, look at my eyes and die. What sort of inhumanity and brutality can any man descend to? When I started thinking, could we ever produce people like this in this side of the world? I started to remember the vicious hatred, for example, in Ireland, when loyalists in Northern Ireland, in a coordinated gun attack in January the 4th, 1976, murdered in cold blood 6 Catholics. They were called the Reevy and O'Dowd killings. And it made me think, could men in this country look a person in the eye and kill them because of their religion? The very next day, on the 6th, there was the famous Kins Mills massacre. Could you imagine 12 workers, after doing a day's work, travelling home on their minibus, been stopped, taken out of the minibus, standing alongside the minibus at the ditch, 11 of the 12 who happened to be Protestants, and that these IRA thugs and murderers shot each and every one of them because they were Protestant. One lucky escape was facilitated because he was a Catholic. So the question we've got to ask ourselves is, are there lessons for what's happening in the world today for Ireland? And I say yes, there is lessons to be learned, and I think we better start learning them very quickly. It's no harm in remembering the sentiments, and I'll put them into the public record, if I may, of John Lennon when we were all fans of his, when he sang the most incredible song, which had the words as follows: imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for. And no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. And he went on to say, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will live as one. They are very important sentiments as expressed in the 60s that can be repeated in the world today. I want to concur with the wonderful expressions of contempt in one sense and despair in another, when the Republicans in the United States of America voiced similar opinions to that as expressed by certain countries in Europe, not least of which was Hungary, who are attempting to use the victims of war in Syria, who are escaping to save their lives, to segregate those people into Christian refugees or Muslim refugees. I want to congratulate the very fine sentiments as expressed by the American president when he said, we do not have religious tests for our compassion. I think that's a sentiment that should be applied internationally and across the world, because there are forces at play that say, depending on your religion, will depend on our attitude to giving you sanctity. I think that is the most reprehensible, the most vulgar, the most dangerous sentiments that are being expressed. We cannot allow, as I say, the American Republicans or the Le Pens in France or some other European leaders use the horror of the Paris attacks as an excuse to select people fleeing war and often hunger. We cannot prevent them being afforded sanctuary on the basis of religious discrimination, i.e. only Christians should be prioritised. It is repugnant, and I think we've got to fight all the ultra-right-wing forces that are at play from America, right across Europe, from Hungary to France and every other country which produces these sectarian religious bigots. They have to be fought. We must afford in Ireland the respect and rights of those who are living in horror camps on the borders of Lebanon, which I believe is the source of some of our refugees to be programmed to Ireland. It's important also to note, I would say, that we do not have any Molenbeeks or Genevilliers in Ireland. But we must intensify our resolve never to allow any minorities to be ghettoised. And this is where I want to afford Archbishop Dermot Martin praise. We have in this country in the last 5 years, I think, given Irish citizenship to approximately 40,000 people from diverse countries, I understand in approximately 120 different countries. That's 120 different cultures, possibly languages, religious beliefs. That diversity exists in our city now, in our country now. It's not good enough. And if we want to look, as the Taoiseach has said, that we must tackle the root causes, we must ask ourselves, to what degree does religion act as a cause, one of many causes? I want to congratulate Archbishop Martin when he said the most incredibly progressive words of a Catholic bishop. He said the Church must change, not to go along with society, and neither to opt out of society, but to find the best space possible to be free and unencumbered, to bring the challenging messages of Jesus Christ to society. He went on to say, the Church must free itself, becoming encumbered even from positions which may in the past have been positive and useful to both Church and society, including the control of schools and institutions. He says the Church must give up control of schools, and if we are to be serious as a democracy, we must not use the baptismal cert as the badge of entry to schools. We have diverse country. We've got, as I said, 40,000 in the last 4 years now Irish citizens. It is improper, it is repulsive, it is reprehensible that if you live in an area of Dublin or in any part of Ireland and you are not from the Catholic tradition, where are you supposed to send your child to school? Can I say, while the Archbishop is right, I want to applaud those religious orders that I'm familiar with. The sisters, the Presentation nuns down in Warrenmount, or the Loreto nuns up in Crumlin, or the nuns down in Basin Lane who have such cultural diversity. It's unbelievable. The amount of Muslim children going to these schools is incredible. They are a shining example to the hierarchy in the Roman Catholic Church, that they, having accepted such numbers of non-Irish students, that it is not a threat to the schools. So I would ask that we should support the Bishop in arguing strongly that we have a more open policy of admittance into our school, so as that we can learn from what has happened in Northern Ireland. Two religious Christian groups, Catholics and Protestants, slaughtering each other, Not necessarily because they were Catholics or not necessarily because they came from a Protestant tradition, but it played a very important role. Why are children segregated when it's the most natural place for a child in school to mix with his school friends of different nationalities and cultures? It is the way forward for a modern society, and I think this is a very important lesson that we must learn in addressing the question of where do, as the Taoiseach posed, how do we seek to tackle the root causes? It's not necessarily the root cause, it's possibly one of the causes. Why have the Muslim children go to religious schools in Clonskeagh? Why have Catholics go to the local Catholic school? Why have Protestants go up to the high school? Why have the Jews go to Stratford College? If we're a modern democracy, we should be able to, as a state who's funding the educational system, we should be able to accommodate all of these people. Can I conclude by saying it's a privilege to those communities, including the communities of Rialto, the communities of Marrowbone Lane, who have accommodated the imams who don't necessarily have mosques, who have facilitated them in community facilities to celebrate their Ramadan. It has been a very important lesson in intercultural, interreligious understanding by Irish inner-city people with these new communities. I want to conclude by saying it's a delight, and we must fight everybody that would obstruct the integration or target Muslims as their enemy. It's a credit to the Southwest Inner City of Dublin, the Southwest Inner City Network, who have bestowed next Thursday on an imam from the inner city an award under their annual Youth Community and Lifetime Achievement Award.
Thank you.
We don't want any right-wing fascist to disrupt the developing community understanding that's occurring in our city. Thank you very much.
Now the next speaking slot shared by Deputies Thomas Pringle, Mick Wallace and Joan Collins. Deputy Pringle.
Thanks, Alison Corda. Myself and Deputy Collins will be taking 3 minutes and Deputy Wallace will be taking 4 minutes.
Margaret.
Lashkan Corla, just first of all I would like to just extend my own personal sympathies to the people of Paris and the people of France in response to the atrocities that were carried out in Paris last Friday evening. And there's no doubt that what happened there was a complete act of terrorism and an act attempting to terrorise a whole community and a whole country and forward what none of us really understand is in terms of the aims of the people who carried out these attacks. But I think it's important as well, and seeing that these attacks, we put it in some context as well. There has been a number of terrorist attacks that have taken place over the last number of weeks. Last week there was a bombing attack in Beirut where I think over 40 people were killed. And is that attack any less horrific and any less terrorising than what happened in Paris? I don't believe it is. And the bombing of the Russian flight over Egypt a couple of weeks ago as well, that in itself is a complete and utter act of terror as well, and just equally as bad and equally as desperate an act. And it's something that we should always remember, is that, you know, are those attacks any less terrorising or any less desperate because they took place close to the war zone? The people that died in those attacks are just as innocent as the unfortunate people in France, and their families will suffer for very many years to come as well. But over the weekend, I think now is a time that we do have to look at why these attacks take place and why something like this happens. And over the weekend we saw how Deputy Wallace was attacked because of his response in relation to a tweet he sent out at the time, sympathising with the victims of the attack, but also saying that we have to look and see what we do in the West that makes things like this happen. And I think we can't remove ourselves from that, because it's very dangerous if we look and we only see what security response what's going to take place, and is the response to go out and bomb Syria into the ground again as well? Is that the right response? We need to look at the policies that we and the countries of the European Union and countries of the West have carried out that have laid waste to Afghanistan, laid waste to Iraq, and maybe planted the seeds that allowed the Islamic State to come into the situation that they are in Syria. And we have to question that, and we have to look and see what we do to change that prevents those attacks happening in the future. And that is more long term. It's probably more difficult to do. It's very easy to have a knee-jerk reaction and say that what we have to do, we're at war, we go out and we bomb and we kill more people and more innocent people because of a response and an act of revenge. And we have to look at how we can change the way we behave in the world to ensure that these attacks don't happen again.
Thank you, Lascon Corla. Like every civilised person on this planet, I was appalled and outraged at the events in Paris last Friday night. I want to express my deepest sympathy and solidarity with the victims of this outrage, their families and the French people. Nothing can justify these atrocious acts of 129 people dead and 352 injured, and only for the stopping of the person working in the stadium, in the football stadium. It would have been much higher if that hadn't happened. I also want to make absolutely clear my complete and utter rejection of the reactionary and semi-fascist type ideology of Daesh, of Islamic State, of Al-Qaeda, Nusra Front, Boko Haram and the Taliban fundamentalists in Pakistan and in Afghanistan. I also want to put on record my disgust at Western support for the ruling elite in Saudi Arabia, which has spent over $100 billion exporting the same reactionary fascist ideology of Salafism throughout the world over the recent decades. These are the same Western powers, particularly the US and the UK, who today label as terrorists their former allies and freedom fighters. There is absolutely no question about the fact Al-Qaeda was a creation of the CIA in its war against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan in the 1980s. Al-Qaeda was not deliberately fostered by Iraq. It arose as a consequence of the US-British invasion. But Al-Qaeda in Iraq operates as the Al-Nusra Front in Syria and has received funding and arms from the US, Britain, the Saudis and the Qataris. Islamic State itself has been funded by the Saudis, and particularly by the equally reactionary regime in Qatar. We cannot ignore the fact that there is a wider agenda at play. We now have a very odd situation whereby US imperialism and its Western allies are supporting one group of rebels against the Assad dictatorship while bombing another group. In effect, the US is carrying out military operations in Iraq with its arch-enemy Iran, and on the other hand, they are supporting the military campaign by Saudi Arabia against the Iranian-backed Houthi in Yemen. What is one to make of all this? Well, for a start, I have no illusion that great power politics as engaged in by the US and its allies, or by Russia, or by Iran and Saudi Arabia, share a responsibility for not just what happened in Paris, but also what's happened, but also the millions who have been killed and maimed and displaced from Palestine to Lebanon, Syria, Iraq and Afghanistan. The solution to these horrors will not come from those responsible for it unless they recognise they are responsible for it, and then in recognising that, implementing the economic, social, cultural, educational actions that need as a start to embrace all the peoples of colour, creed and race.
Deputy Mick Wallace.
Thank you, Lascon Corla. I too extend my sympathy and solidarity with everybody that was killed in Paris. Nobody of a rational mind would try and justify what happened. It was beyond horrific. I have a niece who lives in Paris, and 5 people were killed on her street. She has 3 small children, and it wasn't a great place to be on Friday night. And the restaurant where the people were killed, I've been in it twice with my niece, and I can just picture the scene. It's just too bad for words. It's very hard to talk about all this. It's also very hard to explain what is wrong and how can this happen. The amount of people that are being killed today by military hardware has just gone off the Richter scale. The 5 biggest producers of arms, or exporters of arms in the last 5 years were the US, Russia, China, Germany and France. And sadly, you have to ask yourself, if you look and ask how many repressive autocratic regimes in this region that France has not sold arms to, it's a difficult question, because they have sold to Kazakhstan, United Arab Emirates, Iran, Iraq, Jordan, Israel, Kuwait, Lebanon, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Turkmenistan, Turkey, Pakistan. Well, my niece said on Saturday morning that for the first time in her life, she got an idea of what it must be like to live in the Middle East, because it happens on a regular basis, what happened in Paris. Can you imagine it? That you couldn't go to a concert or a restaurant or a bar, but you might be afraid you'd be killed. And this is what these people are facing all the time. And last year, we gave permits for 190 metric tons of bullets to go to Afghanistan. Now, I don't imagine that they did much good in terms of peace. 2.5 million troops have gone through Shannon since 2001. Huge amounts of military armoury have gone through Shannon since 2001. And huge amounts have been overflown. And we are okay with that, as long as the arms industry and the shares have gone up 4% on average in the last 3 days in the arms industry. It's a good weekend for them, because it looks like there's going to be even more arms used. President Hollande said, "We are going to lead a war which will be pitiless." But they're already bombing ISIS and others. They're giving guns and arms to Saudi Arabia, who are giving them to ISIS, as are the United Arab Emirates. They give arms and guns to anyone that will fight Assad. Western countries are arming both sides. We have created ISIS. But we're not going to defeat them military-wise. Only Iraq and Syria will actually eventually defeat ISIS. They want France to react in a strong military fashion. That's what they want. They don't want us to take a peaceful position on it and to stop militarising the area. They don't want us to take a rational position on it. We are feeding them with this whole militarisation of the region.
Now the next speaking slot is shared by Deputies Michael Creed and Paul Connaughton. Deputy Creed.
Thank you very much, Cathaoirleach, and I welcome the opportunity to say a few brief words on the Paris atrocities, and initially to extend my sympathies to the citizens of Paris, to the families of those bereaved, to the French people, and to the ambassador who was here today, and to President Hollande and his government on an atrocity, I think, that shook all of us to our core and raised the most fundamental questions about man's inhumanity to man, and how, if at all, politics can play a role in resolving what appear to be very intractable issues at the root of this terrible atrocity. I think, like 9/11, most of us will remember where exactly we were when this happened. And certainly, courtesy of kind of the digital media age, we almost watched it unfold before our eyes graphically over several hours last weekend. And, when the toxic ideology of ISIS can reach out into the rural heartland of my constituency and injure, a young man, David Nolan, who hails from outside Mill Street Town in my constituency, who was in Paris at the Bataclan with his girlfriend, we have to realise that we really do live in the global village. And, those who would preach an approach of retreat and retrenchment of Irish politics, I think that's a bankrupt ideology. I think we have to, play our part in shaping and influencing the global response, because it is a global village, and we might like to think that we are, far removed from a threat from ISIS, but we can never be certain about that. We can never be absolutely certain. And we can be certain of one thing: if they felt it would advance their case one iota, we would be centre stage. If they felt it would advance their case one iota by having an attack on our shores. So we are all vulnerable. And I do think, as we live in a global village, the question is, can the village speak as one voice? And really what has struck me very forcibly over the last number of days is the entire absence of the United Nations as a voice in condemning and in advocating a roadmap of resolution to what appears to be a very intractable problem globally. I mean, you know, I suppose Syria is the root source of this evil. Presently, it has manifested itself elsewhere. People made reference to previous atrocities in Lebanon.